So today I'm here to talk about all the books that I read during the month of May. May was a super rough reading month and just a rough month in general, I think, for probably most of us. Same with April. Things are just crazy. So I struggled a lot getting books read. I was surprised looking back at the books and thinking like, oh wow, I read way more than I thought I read. I thought I read like 4 books. I ended up reading 8 books and 3 of them were audiobooks, so that was much better than I expected. I basically totally failed that Medieval-a-thon. I'm really sad about it because I was so excited to participate, but then like I said, my reading just fell all apart. So I did not do very great on my Medieval-a-thon TBR. I guess I read 3 books and half of 1. So starting to talk about my favorite book of the month, that would have to be Half a War by Joe Abercrombie. I adored this book. This is the final book in the Shattered Sea trilogy and I was just obsessed with it. The first 2 books in this series were 4-star reads for me, so I just was kind of convinced like, oh, this is just like a really good series but not top tier, until I read this one and I was blown away by this one. I loved the 2 main characters that we follow. Each book in the series we follow different characters and I was obsessed with the 2 in this one. They're like one of my new OTPs, just completely obsessed with them. Something I really love about this series is Joe Abercrombie really played the long game with it. It's almost as if this series was going to be one really long book and then it's like 3 parts, like part 1, part 2, and part 3 is kind of how these books feel, which I really enjoyed, and I'm super excited to move on to new books by him because I just loved the ending to this one so much. So I'm really excited to read The Blade itself. Hopefully soon I'll be getting to that one. Then as far as my least favorite book of the month, I did have one DNF this month, and that was The Oregon Trail by Rinker Buck. This I listened to on audio, and I listened to a little bit more than half of it, which was about 8 hours, I believe. So I think that that's enough into it to count it as completed for the month, because that's a lot of time to spend on an audiobook and then decide you don't want to finish it. So this, I think, was my problem because I didn't learn about what this was before I went into it. I was thinking that this was a historical book about the Oregon Trail, but it's not. It is a little bit, but this is following Rinker Buck, who is a writer, and he and his brother are like recreating the Oregon Trail. So they are, you know, getting all the historically accurate wagon supplies and all the stuff, and they like have a whole map and they're gonna follow it, but then they're like camping out of Walmart when they can't find somewhere, and I just wasn't about it. I also really did not like Rinker Buck, just his like attitude. He thinks very highly of himself and I just didn't want to listen to it anymore, so I did DNF this one. So I guess that would have to be my least favorite book this month. I feel like I've had a pretty mixed bag of reading the last couple months. I've been reading a lot of books I feel like are just really average and mediocre, and one of those books I'm so disappointed to tell you guys was Poison Study by Maria V. Snyder. I was super excited about this book. It seems like it's been one that's been so popular for a long time and I just was really disappointed by it. This is following a girl and she is like on death row basically for committing murder, and right before she's gonna be executed she gets like pardoned basically to become the king's food tester, because the people who are food testing, like their life has to be deemed worthless because they could die at any second if the king's food is poisoned, and they give her a dose of poison that she has to come drink the antidote for every day so she doesn't run away or doesn't like try to escape. I was just really disappointed by this. I gave this a 3 out of 5 stars and I almost feel like it's like a 2.5. I just didn't really feel like it brought anything special to the table. I just was kind of bored the whole time. I did really like the premise, but the execution was just a little bit lackluster for me. I thought that the main guy character, Valak, I really liked him, but other than that, I didn't really care about any of the characters. I thought they were all a little bit boring. And I also thought that this whole book was just very predictable. I basically predicted every single thing that happened throughout the story. I was like, oh, this is what's gonna happen next, and that's exactly what happened. I just hate that in books. I like to be surprised. I like to be like, oh, I don't know what's gonna happen next, and with this one I just didn't have that. There's also a very like minimal amount of romance, but I would have loved this to be one of those books where it's like a super slow burn romance that goes throughout the whole series and you don't really get like a resolution until the last book. I think that this like was perfectly set up for that, but the author didn't go with that. It was just kind of like, meh. I would have liked it more if it like had a little bit more build up, but what can you do? Didn't like this book. I won't be continuing with the rest of the series, unfortunately. Another book I didn't love, Sorry Guys, The Poppy War. I gave this a 3.5 out of 5 stars, so it wasn't horrible, but it just wasn't really what I was expecting, and I wanted more from it so desperately. I wanted more. So the first half of this book was like a 3-star, just like average, and then the second half it really picked up a lot more and got more intense, and so I would give the second half a 4-star, but the first half a 3-star, which landed me at 3.5. So this book is following another orphan, and she ends up taking a risk and getting tested for this special like military academy, and she ends up passing with like flying colors. And it's very unusual for anybody that's not nobility to pass and to get into this academy, but she did. So she goes to this military academy and basically is like learning about all these different like arts of war. And that's kind of where it goes from there. Everything at the academy just was like really boring to me. Nothing really was exciting. I just was kind of like, There was a weird thing happening in this book where it's following our main character Rin, but I almost felt like it wasn't following her. I feel like for the first half of the book, we only got such little snippets into her mind that it didn't even feel like we were following her perspective. It felt like we were just like floating around throughout this academy. Her character itself also felt very inconsistent to me. She was going like from one extreme to the other extreme. She at one point has this like really zen experience, and she was like, nothing in this world matters, like there's no such thing as fear, like I don't need to be scared of anything because I know what happens like in my life and I know this is all meaningless. And then just shortly afterwards she's like really terrified about something happening and she's just like super scared about it, and then she's like so intensely angry, and I'm like, what happened to this whole nothing in the world matters mentality? So I didn't really enjoy her character, and I didn't really think that she was very well developed. But the guy, Callen, I wish this book followed him so badly. I really liked his character. He was like the redeeming part of the story to me, and I just wanted more from him. I wish this was a dual perspective with him, or this story was told from his perspective rather than hers, because he was the much more interesting character in my opinion. There's also been a lot of talk about whether this book is YA or adult. This is being sold as an adult book, so I wouldn't question it in that aspect, but I do feel like this was written to be a YA book, and it felt very standard YA fantasy. But at the like towards the last third, like I mentioned, where it got more intense, I feel like there was more adult content thrown in for the purpose of marketing this as an adult rather than YA. If you had taken out literally like one paragraph of discussion, then it would have been YA in my opinion. So I really was looking forward to a really intense, complicated military fantasy, and I don't really feel like this delivered on that front, but I wouldn't say that it was bad either. I do think that it was relatively entertaining. I'm hoping that this was just a debut author situation and that the second book will be much improved, because I do think that the last third of the book, or last half, third-ish, was much like head and shoulders significantly better than the first 2/3. Hopefully the second book goes on with that. I might get it from the library and just like see what I think about it before purchasing this one, because I'm not too sure about whether or not I really want to continue and collect the rest of the series. Then I read The Marriage Game by Sarah Desai, and I really enjoyed this one a lot. This is an adult romantic comedy, and it's following a girl who has just caught her boyfriend cheating on her. She lost her job. She's gonna move back to San Francisco and live with her parents and work at their Indian restaurant, while at the same time working in the office space above their restaurant, and like start her own business and do that whole thing. But when she gets there, she finds out that her dad has actually rented out the office space to another guy, and she's like pretty annoyed about this, and she wants him to leave, but there's like legalities where like he signed a lease, so she can't kick him out, but she's like really stubborn and is like, I'm gonna work here too. So they end up working together. And throughout this whole thing, her dad has signed her up for a arranged meeting site, which is basically where it's like an arranged marriage, but you just arrange the meeting and then the couple decides like whether they want to keep seeing each other. So she decides like, I'm just gonna go with this. My dad has my best interest in heart. Like, let's go meet some of these guys. But the main story is between her and the man that's sharing her office space. And it was just so cute and so funny. I really would recommend this for fans of Josh and Hazel's Guide to Not Dating. It had the same kind of feeling for me. I thought it was such a blast to read, so entertaining. I would love to see this in a movie. Like, I thought it would be the cutest rom-com. The one thing that I did have an issue with is that it's supposed to be enemies to lovers, but it's one of those situations where you really don't believe the enemies part, because they like say, she's the most infuriating person I've ever met. He is so irritating. I hate him. I can't stand him. But then like every time they have a thought about the person, it's always positive. Like, wow, he's so smart. She's so considerate. Like, look at her. Like, they never have anything that like makes them be irritating towards each other, but then they just say that they're being irritated. So that was the one thing that I didn't like about this book, but I gave it a 4 out of 5 stars because I thought it was really fun and I did enjoy it. Then I read Somewhere Only We Know by Maureen Gu, and I gave this one a 4 out of 5 stars also. I really enjoyed my like fun romances that I read this month, I guess. This is a YA romance following a girl named Lucky who is a K-pop star, and following a boy named Jack who is taking a gap year before he goes into college, and during that year he's kind of like moonlighting as a paparazzi. So he's working for a tabloid and basically just like taking pictures of celebrities that he sees in Hong Kong. And she's in Hong Kong, and they end up running into each other one night, and he figures out who she is even though she's like in disguise. They end up spending a day together. He has a little bit ulterior motives because he does work for a tabloid, but she is just trying to hide and just like have one fun day when she lives on such a strict schedule and a regimen. And I thought this was so cute and so fun, and another one I would love to see as a movie or as like a 3-episode limited series. I think it was just so much fun and I had a blast with it. I've heard a lot of people complain about this one with Jack's motives, but to be honest, it didn't really bother me that much, and I thought like, you know, every romance has to have like a conflict, and I feel like that was just added in to be the conflict of this story, but it didn't really bother me to the point that it affected my enjoyment. But I actually really like this one a lot more than even I Believe in a Thing Called Love. And I just thought it was so cute and so much fun. Definitely exactly what I needed to read this month because of being in a slump. This was perfect for that. Then I'll just briefly mention Dragon Reborn because I didn't finish it, but I got about halfway through this one and I'm still buddy reading this one with Kristen, so I'll continue on into June. Hopefully I'll finish this one by the end of June. I'm sure I probably will, but just thought I'd mention that one briefly. Then the 2 other audiobooks that I listened to this month. The first one that I listened to was Mindhunter by John E. Douglas, and I loved this one. It was so interesting. So John Douglas founded the Behavioral Science Division in the FBI, and this just goes through his whole career and how he started criminal profiling and like how he's helped police on different cases and all the things like that. And I just thought it was so cool and gave such a different perspective to some of the famous like serial killer cases that I've known about for a long time. Since he met and like profiled these people and really got to know them on a completely different level, I thought it was so interesting to hear about. And if you're a fan of true crime, I highly recommend listening to this book or reading it because so enjoyable, so interesting. And I'm definitely looking forward to reading more books by him. Do know that the nature of the topic of this book is very serious and very intense. Not for the faint-hearted basically, but if you are interested in true crime, then you probably are used to that kind of stuff, so then I would recommend this one for you. Then the last book that I read this month was Brain on Fire by Susana Callen, and I really enjoyed this one a lot too. This is following a reporter for the New York Post, and she suddenly starts having these really crazy neurological symptoms that she doesn't know what's going on. Her doctor can't really figure it out. They keep giving her like these weird diagnoses that are not accurate at all. But she starts doing really crazy things like thinking, like being super paranoid, freaking out about like the lights in Times Square and all these different almost schizophrenic type actions. And her psychiatrist starts diagnosing her with something along those lines, some sort of like schizophrenia or something, but that's obviously not the case with what was going on with her. So she ends up having to go stay in the hospital, and she basically doesn't have any recollection of what happened during the month that she was in the hospital. And so this book is her retelling what happened to her based on what she's gathered from like her boyfriend, from her parents, her friends, from the hospital video that they have because they had to record her to see what she was going through when they weren't around and all that kind of stuff. And this was just like so heartbreaking to see something like this happen. My heart broke for her family and just really felt for her. She has such a powerful writing style that really just connects with you empathetically so much. And I just really was touched by her story, and I'm so glad that they were able to figure out what was going on with her because that would have been just so ridiculously stressful, and it was on her family. She talks about that a lot. But this one was really interesting, and I'm really glad that I did read this month, and I'd like to find some more books like along these lines. Well, that's all the books that I read during the month of May. Not a huge wrap up, but not too shabby for what I was going through during the month. Hopefully in June I'll have read a little bit more and kind of gotten out of this like slump that I'm in. I would really enjoy that happening. So hopefully these books I have on my June TBR will be really motivating to me and fun to read. I'll link my TBR in the corner up there if you haven't watched it yet. I definitely would recommend checking that out. But thank you guys so much for watching this video. Make sure to like it down below and subscribe if you want to, and I'll see you in my next one. Bye!